Welcome to the Diversity Pivot Podcast. I'm your host, Julie Kratz. I am thrilled you are here with us today. Our purpose is to share stories, ideas, and tools to help you on your diversity, equity, and inclusion journey. Let's meet this week's guest. Welcome to the Diversity Pivot Podcast. I am thrilled that we are kicking off this season with Ezanne Swanepoel. She is the leading empowerment and relationship expert, helping people strip the blockages and filters that prevent them from unlocking their path to prosperity, fulfillment, and contribution while making a meaningful impact in life and with other people. Ezanne is an award-winning author, keynote speaker that's recently published a book called Connected Rainmaker, Lead with Giving and the Rest Will Come. She holds degrees in various fields of study, is fluent in 6 languages, holy smokes, and she has served several clients on different continents as an advisor and mentor to Fortune 500 companies, leaders, governments, and private sector in over 30 countries, assisting them with transformation, leadership, empowerment, and diversity and inclusion initiatives. So excited to have you, Ezanne, on the show. Welcome.
Sanibonani, Julie. And I say that, of course, on purpose, because what the listeners do not know is that I am originally from South Africa. I live in Canada today. But Sanibonani has a very meaningful way of greeting. And since diversity and inclusion is about relationships and connections, I wanted to greet you in that way because in Africa, we have a belief that you have to be present when you're greeting someone. And Sanibonani is Zulu, a Zulu way for greeting. But if you translate it directly, it means I see you. And therefore, I'm not on my cell phone, or I'm not looking at my computer or out the window or looking at people passing by, but I'm really present and I'm wanting to engage with you. So I am present and I see you, Julie.
Aw, I feel so seen, listeners. Isn't that a cool habit to get into, is bring something from your culture to the conversation. I love it. Ezanne, tell us your story. How did you get into the work of connection?
Wow, Julie, I think that it's not really getting into it, but being born into it is a more authentic expression. As I had said before, I am born in South Africa, and South Africa in itself has such a huge diversity and richness and a complex past. And as a result, I feel it's a very big gift that I was born there. Because I have ancestors from Europe, but I'm African at heart, and that already is a sense of a dichotomy. There are of various aspects within one person that is not always self-evident, and that alone afforded me the opportunity to be exposed to people's preconceived ideas and notions when they engage you, and learn to be compassionate and understanding, and sometimes enjoy it too, right? It's not only, I know very often people abuse that context and it's a very negative experience for people, but there are also beautiful, exciting parts to this dynamic. It's a rainbow in a sense. So in Africa, we have a meaning to our names, and I think that is an additional layer that really embedded this purpose, because I do see it as a life purpose for me. In Africa, we believe that when we are given a name at birth, that name really speaks to the purpose that you are to have in life. And I have 2 names, a Western name and an African name. And my African name is Nomvula, which means Queen of the Rain. So yes, you didn't know it, but you're in the presence of royalty. So where this comes about is because just before I was born, there was great drought in our area. And I was told at the moment that I was born, it started raining. And a huge privilege was bequeathed on me because the Zulu chief had asked the ancestors to gift me with a name. And again, this is really significant because I was born in the years of apartheid, and my father and the Zulu chief were friends. So this was very unusual. And I'm so grateful to my parents for creating this canvas of beautiful mosaic in terms of life experience for me from a very young age. And it was only when I came to North America, when I worked the first time with an American gentleman, that he said to me, you Africans, you have a meaning to your name, right? And I said, yes. And he said, so what does Nomvula mean? And I said, the Queen of the Rain. And he said, oh, something like the Rainmaker. Now, of course, in American terms, I don't think I need to explain the definition of Rainmaker, but in essence, it's one that connects easily with the right people at the right time and is associated with the right monetary components in projects and opportunities. And so that alone does not fully explain how I came into this work. It only makes sense when you look at my first name, which is my Western name, Ezanne. I thought it was a Western name because my mother made up the name. And it really comes from my grandmother's name, Elizabeth Ann, so the E and Z from Elizabeth and Anne. But later on in my life, when I was in Nigeria, I worked with the ministry, and they have a cultural belief that if they have a significant relationship with someone, they will gift them with an African name. So we had such a wonderful work that we did together, which I thought was very meaningful, and we built a great relationship. So I was very disappointed at my departure when they did not give me an African name. And so I felt confident enough to say, I thought we were like family. Are you not going to offer me an African name? And they said to me, but you already have one. And I said, yes, I have a South African one, but I don't have a Nigerian one. And they said, yes, you do. This was news to me because I only knew of my two names. And what I had not really understood initially was that when they pronounced my name, they would always say Ezine. I didn't correct them. I just left it as that. I thought it was special how they chose to call me. But later I realized, and this is where they explained, that this is actually a Nigerian word. It's from the language called Igbo, and it means the good mother of Africa. And so to me, the meaning that has come into this process for me, and it's an ever evolving meaning, is that I think a mother in any context is responsible for fostering healthy relationships amongst family members and friends. And so if I connect these two, it just naturally progressed that I built a lot of relationships in critical industries and was fortunate, and I still feel very privileged, I never take this for granted, that people trust me, and therefore when they want to engage in something meaningful, they would often ask my recommendation of someone that I could introduce them to. Initially, I would just introduce them and stay out of the process. It was just, the purpose was to make wonderful things happen. But I later realized as my career was evolving that people don't always behave the same way with each other as they would in your presence. And so I learned that I had to be part of the introduction process initially. And once a certain dynamic within the relationship was established, I would then with confidence be able to have people do what they want to do. And to me, that is really how I got into this process. I was born into it.
Literally. Oh, wow. What an interesting story about your name. Names are so important. And, there's research that shows it's like our favorite word that we hear, from the time you're a child. That's like the only word you understand. My 2-year-old, like, convinced us that that's the only word she chooses sometimes to hear. I love hearing your own name. And I love that your name has so much depth from your own family history to the Nigerian story, to your South African name as well. And what a full circle moment to be doing this work, facilitating connection. I wonder, Ezanne, for you, helping facilitate, deeper connections with folks, what are some ways we can do that? I love the example you just shared about, not just introducing somebody like, email blind copy, see ya. And I've experienced this with you. She's very diligent about facilitating an intentional connection. How do you do that? Like, how do you practically, because I think we all want more connection, but how do you actually do it?
Well, there are two key starting points. The one that I really believe in is you have to lead with giving. And often people try very hard to be understood or to see what they can get from a relationship first before they look at what they can give to others and how they can understand others first. So this is very often a challenge, and I think that's why it's even something that is of importance and relevance to discuss. Because this is the first part, and the second part is that we have to show up authentically. And it's very hard to be authentic if you don't know who you are. So I like to think that people have the best intention, and I have a belief that people are inherently good. Not everyone agrees with me, but I choose that to be part of my belief system. And so from that belief system, I don't think that people deliberately wake up and say, gee, how can I make someone's day miserable today? I don't think they do that.
I love telling that joke in facilitations. Like, who gets out of bed in the morning is like, I can't wait to be a non-inclusive person. I just don't think it exists. Maybe a few people, but most people don't.
Exactly. And so what do we need to do when we want to be authentic is we have to put the mask down and we have to just be ourselves, and that requires vulnerability. So I'd like to share a story with you, maybe just for the listeners to hear what I mean from a business context. And I think this would give an understanding of something that I practically experienced. So in North America, many people think Africa is a country, but it's a continent. And the respective countries have many different subcultures and different languages and different ways of doing things. And why this is relevant is that I went to Ghana in West Africa to do some work. This was quite a while back. And it was the very first time that I was going to Ghana to do some work. And I was working with banking executives in the banking industry, and they were doing quite a large change management process in their bank. And it was really important for me that they got the best value, because this would provide infrastructure and services to every person in that country that had never received banking systems that we take for granted in Canada or in the US or wherever, in first world countries. So it was really important to me to do it right. I always feel that way, but this especially, I didn't want my lack of possibly understanding some of the smaller cultural nuances to influence or impact it negatively in any way. And so when I arrived and I introduced myself, I decided I was going to be vulnerable. And I said, I have done my best to prepare myself adequately to be here and to serve you. But sadly, there are not a lot of things about business etiquette noted for me to read about Ghana. And so I don't want to make assumptions that Ghana works the same way as South Africa, because in all probability it doesn't. So I had asked them if I did something that offended them or that got them stuck. Sometimes someone does something and your mind stays on that. You can't continue to listen to anything else because it somehow touches your value system. So I didn't want people to get stuck with something that I was unconsciously doing, but I wanted to really be there to serve around what we were trying to impact and change. So during the duration of the program, everyone agreed. And fortunately, I've always adopted an approach of being ego-free. So I just I said to them, listen, we're learning together. I'm here to give you what I can give, but I'm also going to learn from you. So we started our discussion forum, and they were a room of executives. I was standing in front addressing them. And at some point, I needed to distribute some information to them. And so I'll just explain a little bit what I did, because I can't physically demonstrate to the listeners. So I needed to just share a pack of papers, documents with the group, and I had them printed. So I just divided the papers in two heaps, and I handed with my one hand to a gentleman the one pack, and with my other hand the other pack to a lady in the room. And I asked if they would please just take one and then pass it on to the room. And I carried on with my conversation, thinking nothing of it. It was not even a few minutes, and someone's hand went up, and they said to me, Ezanne, you have just used very foul language and you offended me. So I was grateful in one sense that I had set a safe enough space that they felt confident enough that they could express it. But I'm also human, and I was taken aback because I really could not think of anything that I had done. My first train of thought was maybe my accent. So I said, I'm very certain I didn't deliberately use any bad language. That is just not even in general the vocabulary I use. So would you mind just explaining to me in what way I offended you? I really apologize. It was not intentional, but what word do you think I used? And they played a little bit with me. So they were starting to giggle, etc. And at some point, elder African lady, we call them Madala, she or Goko, she raised her hand and she said to me, no, Ezine, don't worry. She said to me, it's not a literal word that you pronounced, but it was something that you did. So I said, but please, Goko, you still have to explain to me because I don't know what I did. And she said to me, I passed the papers with my left hand to someone else. And in Ghanaian culture, it is exceptionally rude. It is like using the F word to the power of 10. It is very powerful and very insulting to do that. You always have to use your right hand when you're engaging someone else. Now, some people could argue, well, it was an international context, but the essence is we are people. And people engage and connect based on what they understand. And I was, after all, in their space, right? So I started laughing, and because they all started laughing. Now I understood the joke, and I said, "Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to learn." Because at that moment, I realized, had I not been vulnerable, imagine, Julie, I would have had half of the group stuck on the fact that I had cursed them. They would not have evolved in the conversation with me, and I would have been sublimely unconscious about what I had just done. I would not even have known, and I would have lost many of the people in the process. So the critical part of the story for me is really that you need to be vulnerable at the offset when you meet people. And that way, you show your authentic or your real self to the individual, and it gives them permission almost to also meet you with their real self.
Oh, yeah, that's beautiful. And I like what you said about the ego-free zone, because I don't know if there were a lot of egos around that table. I don't envision them being comfortable calling you in the way that they did. And I can also put myself in your shoes or try to empathize with, being a facilitator, being up in front of a group is already nerve-wracking as it is. But then when someone says something like that, I mean, you just feel it's really easy to feel defensive, and to calm your nerves in the moment and to stay curious and ask questions is counterintuitive to how one might naturally feel. So thanks for modeling all that and putting the pieces together for us. Azam, I'm curious, having been in so many cultures the way you have, with such a unique vantage point. I love what you said about Africa. Yes, it is a continent with many, many different cultures within it. I have learned so much about Africa from our South African teammate, Michelle has taught me so much about South Africa, and she's from Zimbabwe originally. And so we're just learning together. So I love all that. Tell us what it's like to translate your content internationally. Like what works, what's different, what's nuanced within like that global context of connection.
Very interesting question, Julie. Although I recognize myself as African, today I also recognize myself as Canadian, but I view myself as more than either. I really see myself as a global citizen. So when I think of any particular engagement, I think of human being. Now, so in the true, authentic African way, I could argue that every single human being originates from Africa anyway, which is the truth. But that would be a bit superficial in terms of the conversation that we're wanting to have. Is that more importantly, I think there are certain individual values or individual ways that people would like to be treated and cared about and engaged with, and those things never change, no matter where you are in the world, no matter where. And so I like to often recommend to people to start with that which you have in common, because I spoke earlier to you about how people want to start by being understood, but if you can't get to the point initially, because it does take a bit of training to put your own needs to the side and then to first engage with others, maybe a second level as a starting point could be that you want to engage with people on what you have in common. And if you start with that, the connection starts. And when the connection starts, then we're more tolerant and understanding of each other, because love and compassion comes into that. And I use love even in the business context, because we are human beings and that doesn't change wherever you function. So from a global perspective, I think if you're treating people with the intent of loving them and caring about them, I don't think that you can really go wrong. There is a little dynamic that I share with people sometimes around, are you focusing on looking at a caring relationship or a careless relationship, or are you looking at a careful relationship? And if I may explain that to you for a moment, maybe that would give a slight different nuance in terms of approach, is that these are the three ways I think that you can be in a relationship. And when you choose to be careless in a relationship, it's because you're putting yourself above other human beings and you look down at them as a person, essentially. So when you do that, you become more careless in your relationship. And because you care less about the impact and the influence on that person, you will not achieve what you're wanting to in terms of connection. The opposite is true if you are wanting to be too careful. And this tends to happen when you're trying to put someone on a pedestal, or you think that you are not good enough to engage with them. You tend to walk on eggshells. And when you walk on eggshells, you can also not always authentically be yourself or engage naturally. And then you are careful, so you are limiting the ability to connect. The true authentic relationship is one where we are able to strive to a relationship where we're caring. And this can only be achieved when we are engaging each other, viewing each other as equals in terms of our ability to share and connect. So when you perceive yourself as an equal to other human beings, it doesn't matter the age, the sex, the race, or whatever the difference is that you have, you become caring. And a caring relationship brings the biggest value back to you in the longer term.
I love that. Yeah, because it's like this comparison game we play sometimes. And Americans, I would imagine, do this a bit more often because we're more of an individualist type of culture. But yeah, this like, I have more money than you, or I have this and you don't, or I'm an expert. These words that we throw around can be really disruptive to connection because it's creating a stratification. It's creating a less than, more than versus, like you said, seeing each other as equals, seeing each other as human beings there to care for one another and support one another as we're meant to do as a social species. That is very natural to us, but the world we live in doesn't always cultivate that. Ezanne, just thinking about what you see for the future. I'm always curious to ask thought leaders in this space. How do you see the conversation with connection and diversity and inclusion evolving in the future?
I spoke a little bit about the challenges already, but what I didn't mention is that certainly I think that I've been privileged from being in South Africa and being born there and going through a process of transition, of integration, and being a rainbow nation. It afforded me a practical experience, not a theoretical concept of what it is to integrate as a nation. And we are the first country that did it successfully with no bloodshed in the whole world. So that provided me insights which I think are applicable in every context. So we do have our unique cultural aspects that we need to consider, but there are some things that when I look today in North America, how we are managing some of our initiatives, although they are well intended, these are some of the things that I think we should consider future focused, that I don't think we're always doing right now. I applaud the fact that we're at least doing something. And I'm not saying that nothing is impacting, but these are things that I have picked up as I converse with people. Clearly, this is important to me. So I like to just learn from people in North America and understand their views and their perspectives around how to manage this. And it's interesting to me because although it's on the other side of the world, it's almost exactly the same conversations that I had with people just before the new South Africa started its integration process, which is a good sign because it means that human beings operate in a similar way when they are wanting to engage. So we can learn from other places in the world, essentially, how to do it better. So one of the things that I think stems from this dynamic and this process of wanting to segregate and wanting to make people put them in boxes and make them too different or too this or too that usually stems from two things. It's either from pain, current pain or past pain, or the anticipation of future pain, or it stems from fear. And then, of course, in some instances, it can be both. So what we absolutely need to do is we need to find ways to be able to communicate to each other in a platform that is compassionate, that is safe, and that allows for creation of understanding of each other. And this often starts, as I said, with that which we have in common, because that's easier for us to speak about. And when we have a commonality, we feel we have a link. And when we feel we have a link, there's a greater interest for us to understand each other even better. So it's difficult to get a constructive conversation in place if you don't have that as a foundation. And this is where I think future focused, we need to provide more of these platforms, not only, and this is maybe the second element that I want to highlight, not only for the people that are experiencing the injustice, but also, and this is very different to what most people think, also to the very people that have been maybe in inverted comma, the perpetrators or the ones that have created the bad behavior in the past. Because when people are enlightened and they realize what they've done, they're already so guilt-ridden. And it brings me back to what you and I spoke of earlier, that I would like to think that people don't deliberately want to hurt others, but when it doesn't impact you, and when you don't have to think about something because it's not in your sphere of influence or reference, you're not going to fight for the cause, or you're not even going to try and understand it because it's just not in your peripheral. And when it becomes part of your tacit knowledge, and you now would like to actually do something about it, but you're guilt-ridden, what do guilty people do? They defend. And we can't defend and understand at the same time. So both parties need to be supported in this safe environment. We cannot only serve the one, we have to serve all parts of the challenge.
Yeah. Wow. So much to unpack there, but like, I love what you said about pain and fear, and sometimes both of them, really creating disruption to connection potentially, because if we're afraid or we're traumatized or experiencing pain or afraid of experiencing pain, then it's going to prevent us from this conversation. And it has to be a both and, you starting the story with my privilege of growing up in a global context and seeing all the things you got to see growing up. For a lot of people, that's just not the lived experience. They live in a community with people like them, and they stay there for the duration, most of their life. And maybe they're lucky to travel or to meet somebody new occasionally, but we have really insular networks, and that's got to be disrupted. And thankfully, demographics, the way they're playing out, at least here in the United States, that will be happening. Like, it's just, we're still very segregated there. So I love the idea of just getting different vantage points to different people's lived experiences, and putting them in it, taking yourself out of the equation, taking your ego out of the equation is something I'm taking from this conversation. Ezanne, it's been so lovely to talk with you. I can't believe time's up already. Tell our listeners how, I know you've got a new book out, like tell our listeners how they can connect with you and follow your work.
Oh, thank you, Julie. The best way will be if you wanted to maybe start with, I have some free bonuses that I would love to offer your listenership, and they can access that on my book website, which is the same as the title, connectedrainmaker.com. So the title of my book is Connected Rainmaker, Lead with Giving and the Rest Will Come. It is available on Amazon, so if they wanted to get a copy, they're more than welcome to go there. But I really want to also encourage them to benefit from the lovely bonuses that I've created. And if there's anyone that has questions or would like to engage me more, they are more than welcome to email me at askezanne@ezanne.com. So my name, just again, is Ezanne. So ask Ezanne@ezanne.com.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, ask Ezanne. Definitely left our listeners with a lot of great ideas today, and listeners, take her up on that. I have found Ezanne to be an incredible ally. Just having gotten to know each other over the course of this year from a networking group of women authors all over the world. Just such an inspiration getting to spend time with you. So I appreciate you so much, and thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Julie.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Allies are necessary for positive change. If you are on the journey to becoming an ally, we invite you to participate in our brand new Lead Like an Ally online program, or get a copy of our new book, Allyship in Action, available on Amazon. Both are helpful tools that meet leaders where they're at and help provide tools for professional and personal settings. Head over to nextpivotpoint.com to get started today.